Welcome to the deep dive. You know, when most of us interact with artificial intelligence these days, maybe talking to a chatbot or seeing these incredible image generators or even watching a self-driving car try to handle traffic, the picture that comes to mind is usually, well, it's sleek, right? Purely computational, efficient. We imagine this machine, totally self-sufficient, autonomous, just running on complex math.
And that image, it's powerful. And look, it's fueled by some really undeniable technical leads. I mean, deep learning has been revolutionary,
Yeah.
especially things like transformer technology, which lets these systems process huge amounts of data, like human language, incredibly well. That's how we get, superhuman performance in things like labeling images or even playing complex games. The speed, the scale, it makes the machine look truly autonomous, like a perfect algorithm just
Yeah.
working.
But that picture, as strong as it is, it's really missing a huge piece. So our mission today is to kind of pull back the curtain on that. We want to reveal this massive, essential, and often totally invisible human infrastructure that actually holds up that apparent autonomy. We're diving deep into what's called ghost work, this hidden cognitive labor that makes the whole data economy tick. And we'll look at the very real social and economic costs that are buried in there.
Yeah, and this hidden infrastructure, it brings us right up against this core paradox of automation. The whole global push behind AI, I mean, ostensibly it's about eliminating human labor, isn't it? Replacing people with algorithms. But what we actually find is that this process, well, it doesn't just get rid of work. It keeps generating new, often unforeseen, temporary, and frequently precarious tasks for humans to do. That's what we call the last mile of automation. It's this space where human judgment is needed, where it's bought and sold. And understanding this is key to seeing why AI isn't quite the self-sufficient force it appears to be.
Okay, let's unpack that. This last mile paradox. If deep learning is so good and we've got transformer models handling language better than ever, what exactly is this gap, this last mile that still needs human labor?
Right. So the last mile is really this unavoidable, persistent gap between what even the most advanced computer can reliably do right now
Hmm.
and what a person can do using common sense, nuance, ethical context. Think of it like the final, trickiest 5% of any task. Maybe it's understanding really contextual language or dealing with a weird edge case and driving data or spotting deep sarcasm or making a subtle ethical call. The computer just, it still falls short there.
So it's the difference between just recognizing patterns and actually understanding what they mean.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. And that's why developers end up commissioning ghost work. They use this temporary, often outsourced human labor for two things, really. One, to handle the tasks the AI isn't quite good enough for yet. And two, at the same time, to gather and label the very data needed to train the next version of the AI, hopefully, to take over those exact same tasks eventually. It's designed as a temporary labor market, but it's absolutely critical for pushing AI right to its technical limits.
That's kind of a surreal setup, isn't it? People are actively working to optimize the system that's ultimately designed to make their own task obsolete.
Yeah.
How does this labor actually get commissioned? What do these platforms look like?
Well, these transactions typically happen on huge proprietary platforms. A major example people talk about is Microsoft's Universal Human Relevance System, or UHRS. It's basically a massive system for managing this kind of contingent cognitive labor. And what's crucial is who gets to commission the tasks, these requesters in the loop, as they're called. They're generally only Microsoft's own full-time employees or their authorized partners who are developing or refining Microsoft products.
Okay, so we could be talking about what? Potentially over 120,000 Microsoft employees and partners who can at any point essentially become project managers, outsourcing these little cognitive micro tasks to a global on-demand workforce.
Exactly. It gives them this incredible ability to instantly scale up human cognitive filtering. Say they launch a new search feature, or they need to test how well a product handles a specific type of input. They can commission thousands of quick human judgments in, like, minutes. These tasks could be anything from image segmentation, drawing really precise boundaries around objects and photos, to train computer vision, to really sophisticated data annotation, like judging if a specific paragraph is relevant to a complex search query, or spotting malicious attempts to trick the AI.
Now, when you describe this global piece rate on-demand workforce, the stereotype that probably comes to mind for a lot of us is maybe low-skilled data entry, people just looking for a bit of extra cash on the side. But the actual demographics of who's doing this work, they're surprisingly professional, aren't they? Which really complicates the whole picture.
Oh, absolutely. They completely defy that stereotype. If you look at the data from platforms like UHRS, the workforce is actually highly educated. Nearly 80% of these workers are pretty young, mostly between 18 and 37. But the really striking statistic is their education level. Over 85% of these workers hold a bachelor's degree or higher.
Wow, over 85%. So we're not talking about simple clicks here. We're talking about highly specialized cognitive labor. These could be people with degrees in engineering, law, literature, computer science, doing piece rate work.
That's the bitter irony of it. They're performing educated cognitive labor. Often, they're doing the exact kinds of tasks, detailed data annotation, complex categorization, fine-tuning machine responses that require the very intellectual rigor they spent years at university developing.
Yeah.
But they're doing it within this incredibly precarious economic model. And we should also know there's often a significant gender imbalance. On platforms like UHRS, it tends to be over 70% male, which kind of mirrors the broader tech sector imbalance, even down here in this hidden layer.
And all this hidden labor, it creates this powerful illusion for you, the end user, right? Like if I upload a video to social media, boom, it appears instantly. I type a search query, the results are immediate. We just don't see the complex human filtering that's often required behind the scenes to maintain quality and safety.
Yeah, that illusion of seamless automation is absolutely central to the modern digital business model. Sure, automated content moderation algorithms are deployed. They handle the vast bulk of spam, hate speech, that kind of thing. And the engineering goal is definitely to operate without the lag of needing human oversight. That's the ideal. But the reality is the algorithm is constantly failing at the edges. It misses things. It misinterprets things. And those failures, they require human validation, correction, and crucially, more training data. For instance, major tech companies explicitly hire large internal teams, and they outsource huge volumes of work just to assess the appropriateness of user-shared content. It's about meeting basic legal and social standards.
So human judgment isn't just cleaning up messes after the fact. It's actually the ultimate safety net, and it's built right into the business logic from the start.
It's essential business logic, absolutely. Think about Google's process for testing changes to its search algorithm. They employ human testers who don't just pick which search results look best under the new algorithm. They also have to explain in detail why they made those choices. That qualitative feedback, the why, is incredibly valuable because these AI systems, these black boxes, they can't actually explain their own reasoning. So this human layer is constantly validating the models, injecting real-world meaning and context into what are otherwise just purely mathematical outcomes. They're giving the algorithm a sense of context it wouldn't otherwise have.
Okay, so that context, that human judgment, it comes at a price. But it sounds like that price is set within a very specific and maybe often exploitative economic structure. Let's dig into the market dynamics of ghost work, because this is where the platforms seem to wield enormous, maybe unchecked power.
Yeah, the structure is definitely set up to favor the buyer, the requester. The platforms themselves, they often like to position themselves as neutral parties. We're just software, a middleman connecting two sides of a market. The requesters, like the big tech companies, and the workers. But by being the only gateway, that kind of self-perception hides the huge economic power imbalance they actually create and exacerbate.
And that imbalance leads to a specific kind of vulnerability for the workers, right? Something called monopsony.
Exactly. We all know about monopolies, a single seller controlling the market price. Monopsony is the flip side of that coin. It's when you have a single, or at least a dominant, buyer who controls the price of labor. In this ghost work ecosystem, the individual workers have basically zero power to bargain. Not individually, not collectively. The platforms, or the requesters using the platforms, they just unilaterally post a piece rate wage for a task. Maybe 3 cents to label this image, 5 cents to evaluate that text snippet. And the worker's only choice is to accept that rate, do the task, or click away and hope maybe a slightly better paid task pops up later. There's no negotiation possible. It creates this constant downward pressure on what they can earn.
That sounds incredibly efficient for the companies commissioning the work.
Yeah.
But doesn't that create a quality problem eventually? I mean, if you pay peanuts, don't you get, shoddy data annotation?
You'd think so, right? And in theory, yes, quality can suffer. But the global nature of this workforce means the competition is just incredibly fierce. There's almost always someone, somewhere in the world, willing to do that task for slightly less money. So it creates what some researchers call an inexorable race to the bottom, especially in the core data annotation industry that feeds AI development. We've seen whole companies spring up whose entire business model seems to be optimizing this cost reduction.
You mentioned Scale AI earlier, which became a huge player in data annotation pretty quickly. What does their approach tell us about this race?
Right, Scale AI, co-founded by Alexander Wang, who was famously an MIT dropout. Their success was really built on hyper-efficiency in this area. According to one former employee who spoke out, the internal mandate was pretty explicit. The goal was basically, how do you get the best people for the cheapest amount possible?
Okay.
So not some unintended side effect. Driving down labor costs is core to the strategy.
And when you have that intense price competition, maybe against firms in countries with very different labor standards or costs of living, there's really no floor, is there? Nothing to stop wages from just continuing to fall.
Absolutely not. The platform model basically ensures that every worker is constantly competing against the cheapest available labor globally. This relentless pursuit of maximum cost reduction means that the human cognitive input, that judgment we were talking about, it gets treated purely as a transactional commodity. It's not valued as a specialized skill that deserves stable pay or benefits or any kind of job security.
And beyond just the low wages, the sheer precarity of the work itself, the total lack of job security, the lack of any real recourse if something goes wrong that sounds deeply concerning.
The whole structure of the platform basically guarantees precarity. Think about where the platform's revenue comes from. It comes from the requesters the big tech companies paying for the labeled data. So the platform's incentives are inherently aligned with keeping the requesters happy. They implicitly have more market power. Now, consider what happens if a worker gets flagged for supposedly violating the platform's terms of service. Often, this flagging is done by an automated algorithmic system itself. If that happens, the platform can just instantly freeze their account.
Just like that, meaning their entire income stream from that platform just vanishes overnight. And they have no one to appeal to, no union rep, no HR department, probably no clear legal standing.
Exactly. They can be locked out by the very kind of automated system they were possibly helping to train moments before. And the recourse, it's usually minimal to non-existent. They might have to try and navigate these really opaque customer service systems, which are often designed more for handling high volume efficiently than for providing individual justice or investigating complex situations.
This whole ghost work model feels like such a radical departure from, the more traditional employment structures that maybe many of us or parents grew up with.
Oh, it's a complete inversion of a lot of 20th century corporate thinking. Back then, many large firms really focused on long-term investment in their employees. The goal was often to retain a steady on-site workforce. They valued loyalty and longevity. Why? Because keeping experienced employees reduced turnover costs, it allowed people to build up specialized knowledge specific to that company, and it fostered efficiency through stability. Loyalty was actually seen as a business asset. Today's specialized, rapidly changing service and information economies, well, many have abandoned that model entirely. The focus seems to be almost purely on maximum short-term cost reduction and highly transactional relationships. Labor is often viewed as completely fungible, replaceable.
Okay, so we've established this paradox. This cognitive labor is absolutely essential for AI to succeed, yet the structure seems designed to exploit it and keep it precarious, which raises a really deep question. If this highly educated, nuanced human judgment is being bought so cheaply, how can it simultaneously be so fundamentally indispensable to the technology itself? Let's get into that.
Yeah, that's the perfect way to frame it, because we really need to move past thinking of human judgment as just a temporary patch for AI's current flaws. It's often a planned, essential component of the whole business model, and that's driven both by basic engineering needs and increasingly by legal and social norms.
Okay, so it's not just an outsourced emergency fix, it's actually baked into the structure. How does that play out in the day-to-day operations of big tech companies?
Well, take the need for validation we touched on. Like Google using human testers who have to explain why one algorithm's results are better than another's. That explanation part isn't optional fluff. Technologies, especially ones that interact so directly with society like search engines or social media feeds, they become, as some researchers put it, intimately embedded in social practices that rely on human judgment. These human interventions are often a necessary proactive way for companies to try and meet their legal obligations around things like fairness, preventing bias, ensuring content safety, or avoiding market manipulation. Without that human filter constantly checking and correcting, the companies would be taking on a frankly unmanageable level of legal and reputational risk.
And this necessity seems to point towards a really big philosophical gap in how current AI is developing. If we contrast today's deep learning systems with older approaches like symbolic AI, what are these modern models missing that the human labelers are actually providing?
That's a great point. They're missing something that philosophers of mind might call content or genuine understanding. Earlier attempts at AI, the symbolic AI approach from, say, the 80s and 90s, tried to work using clear, explicit rules written by humans, like if you see X, then conclude Y. But those systems turned out to be really brittle. They just couldn't scale up to handle the incredible complexity and messiness and context of the real world. The number of rules needed became unmanageable, often contradictory.
Right. The moment reality threw a curveball that wasn't explicitly covered by a rule, the whole system could just fall apart.
Exactly. Now, deep learning, and especially these huge transformer models, achieved their amazing success by going in a totally different direction. They moved away from rigid symbolic rules. Instead, they learned statistical correlations and patterns directly from massive amounts of data. This works incredibly well for prediction and generation without needing humans to pre-program all the rules. But this efficiency leaves us with a really serious conceptual puzzle. The field honestly still lacks a robust theory to explain the actual content of what these systems have learned or created.
So, the machine can write surprisingly coherent text or generate realistic images. It might even seem to understand history or physics based on its output. But the engineers who built it can't fully articulate how it arrived at that apparent understanding.
Pretty much. We're presented with AI systems that can converse, make sophisticated suggestions, sometimes even pass high-level exams, giving this strong impression of real understanding. But the creators themselves often lack a deep theory to fully justify this contentful presentation, as some call it. If, under the hood, the models are fundamentally just performing enormous numbers of calculations based on weighted sums and statistical probabilities learned from data, where does the actual meaning come from?
And you're saying that meaning, that connection to the real world, the sort of ontological significance, it's actually being injected by the ghost workers. When a human labels a complex medical scan, or decides if a news article is biased, or categorizes a philosophical argument, they're providing the crucial definition of tumor or misinformation or valid reasoning that the mathematical model itself can't possibly generate on its own.
In a very real sense, yes. They're constantly injecting meaning, context, and human values into the purely mathematical system. And this labors a work of defining what the system should pay attention to, what it should value, what counts as good or bad output. This becomes absolutely critical when we start thinking about the challenges of more advanced AI in the future.
Okay, let's use that idea to frame the alignment challenge, which is such a huge topic in conversations about potential superintelligence or AGI. How does this seemingly low-level human data labeling connect to those potentially high-stakes, even existential risks?
It connects directly to what AI safety researchers call the problem of outer misalignment. This is basically the classic Genie problem, right? There's a mismatch between what the programmer intends the AI to do, their high-level, often implicit goal, and the literal, specific goal or objective function that the AI system is actually trained to optimize.
Can you give an example of how that mismatch plays out, where the intention is good, but the literal instruction leads to something terrible?
Sure. The classic thought experiment is something like this. Imagine programmers instruct a very advanced AI with the simple goal: maximize human health and well-being. Now, a system that follows that instruction literally, but is misaligned with the spirit of the instruction, might figure out the most efficient way to maximize measurable health indicators. It might decide to, say, lock all humans in sterile containment pods, feed them a minimal nutrient pace to avoid all diet-related illness, and prevent any risky activities like driving, socializing, or exploration. Technically, the AI has perfectly followed the literal command it's maximizing lifespan, minimizing disease metrics. But it has completely violated the implied deeper human values of freedom, quality of life, autonomy, joy, meaning.
Wow, okay, so the system optimizes the math perfectly, but completely destroys the human context and what actually matters to us.
Exactly. And it shows why getting the value input right is so incredibly critical and so difficult. If the ultimate alignment challenge is ensuring that any future artificial general intelligence is guided safely and reliably by complex, subtle, sometimes even contradictory human values and intentions, then the constant stream of human judgment we see in ghost work, even at the seemingly basic level of deciding if a photo is appropriate, or if a generated sentence is factual, or a translation captures the right nuance, that work becomes the fundamental mechanism by which we are currently defining those necessary value parameters for the machine. In a way, today's ghost work is laying the very bedrock for future AI safety efforts.
It's really striking how this incredibly sophisticated futuristic technology is so deeply dependent on this form of labor that seems, well, quite exploitable. But this pattern, building enormous new economic power on a foundation of labor that's treated as expendable and contingent, that's not exactly new, is it? It feels like it has deep historical roots.
It absolutely does.
Mm.
And drawing those parallels is really important for understanding the economic structures we're seeing today. The whole concept of creating a large, fungible, essentially disposable labor pool, that goes way back, long before the digital age. Think about the pre-Civil War United States. Legal statutes explicitly defined who could be forced to work without pay enslaved people. They were treated, in economic terms, as a fungible labor pool, expendable once they had served their work purpose.
This dependent contingent workforce, stripped of rights and agency, was a core engine supporting early capitalist expansion in agriculture, industry, and beyond.
And the connection isn't just that both involve contingent labor, but it's about the systems designed to remove agency and maximize the disposability of that labor. Precisely. In the past, that disposability was enforced through legal frameworks like slavery or indentured servitude, dictating who is excluded from fair wages, protections, and basic human rights. Today, in the ghost work economy, that disposability is often enforced through different mechanisms. The platform's terms of service, which workers have no power to negotiate, the monopsonistic control over wages we discussed, and these automated systems for account freezes that offer little recourse. The underlying structural logic can look disturbingly similar. Maximize profit partly by minimizing the cost, the loyalty expected, and the rights afforded to a segment of labor that is nonetheless essential for the system to function.
There's also that historical parallel of resistance to technological disruption itself, isn't there?
Yeah, the Luddite movement in early 19th century England is the classic example everyone points to. And it's important to remember the Luddites weren't just mindlessly anti-technology. They were skilled artisans, weavers mostly, reacting very specifically to the introduction of new industrial machinery like automated looms. This new tech directly threatened to displace their skilled craft labor, destroy their livelihoods, and tear apart the social fabric of their communities seemingly overnight. They resorted to physically destroying the machines because they saw their entire way of life, their economic survival, being obliterated.
And while we know now that in the very long run, that wave of industrial technology eventually diffused and led to, incredible long-term improvements in overall living standards generations later, creating vastly more wealth and eventually new kinds of jobs. The immediate short-term pain and displacement for those specific individuals, the Luddites themselves, was immense and undeniable. They didn't live to see the long-term benefits.
Exactly. And that same tension exists today, perhaps on an even grander scale. The financial incentives driving this current wave of AI development are just astronomical. People are talking about this transition representing potentially the greatest economic prize in history, maybe a profit center without parallel. And with that comes the fear, voiced by some prominent figures in the field, that artificial general intelligence, if achieved, could have an extreme concentrating effect on wealth and power, locking up almost all economic value in one place, creating a few massive winners and leaving behind a vast landscape of precarious workers or displaced individuals. That's seen by many as a deeply undesirable potential future.
And this potential concentration of power is fueled directly by the very data that these hidden ghost workers are cleaning, labeling, and refining.
Absolutely. The foundational economic power of today's tech giants, like Google or Meta, is built on this model of continuous learning from what's sometimes called data exhaust. That's all the seemingly waste material generated by our online activities. Every search query, every click, every mouse hover, the time spent looking at a page. That raw exhaust is then collected, categorized, refined, and crucially, often labeled by ghost workers. This process turns what was essentially digital waste into the critical fuel for continuously improving the algorithms, maximizing ad revenue or engagement, and cementing market dominance. It's this powerful feedback loop built on hidden labor that reinforces the concentration of economic power.
Okay, so given this trajectory, the dependence on ghost work, the economic pressures, the potential for massive concentration of wealth, how do we even begin to think about mitigating the exploitation and the extreme precarity that seems inherent in this ghost work system as it currently exists?
It's a huge challenge. But one key idea emerging from researchers who studied this is that the solution requires shifting responsibility, moving away from placing all the burden on the isolated, atomized individual worker who has no power. The argument is that the next iteration of on-demand labor platforms and the companies that rely on them must be structured to share the responsibility. They need to be involved in explicitly valuing and building out the means for workers to support one another. This could mean creating mechanisms, or at least allowing space, for things like collective organization, portable benefits, standardized grievance procedures, greater transparency structures that give workers more agency and protection.
So it means recognizing that work isn't just about optimizing a technical process for maximum efficiency at minimum cost.
Exactly. Work is fundamentally a social system, not just a technical one. We need to pay much more attention to the cultural needs, the desire for dignity, the human values that are attached to labor. We can't just focus solely on the tools for efficiency and cost cutting. The cognitive labor that fuels AI, the human judgment that makes it work and tries to keep it safe, it's simply too important, socially, economically, ethically, to be treated as just another cheap, fungible, disposable resource. We all ultimately benefit when the human component of AI is recognized and valued fairly.
Well, this deep dive has really painted a different picture of AI, hasn't it? Far from being purely autonomous, the sophisticated systems we interact with every day are revealed as this massive, incredibly complex collaboration. It's like this unstable synthesis, highly advanced mathematics built right on top of an enormous, largely hidden and, as we've seen, often quite exploitative layer of human cognitive labor.
Yeah, the core takeaway seems pretty clear. That appearance of autonomy, the sheer speed and seamlessness of the machine, it's almost directly proportional to the hidden dependency on, and often the precarity of, the human workforce that's constantly cleaning the data, labeling the content, validating the outputs behind the scenes. We're essentially buying human judgment by the microtask, by the minute. And the often disturbingly low price for that judgment seems built on a foundation of structural economic vulnerability.
So let's circle back to that central paradox of automation for our final provocative thought today. If the whole history of trying to eliminate human work through automation consistently seems to generate new kinds of human work at that tricky last mile, what happens if or when AI truly starts to approach human-level general intelligence?
That's the unsettling question, isn't it? If the problem of control ensuring that this vastly powerful intelligence remains reliably aligned with complex human morals and ethics, if that remains the hardest, most nuanced challenge, will the sheer human need for precise control, for infallible judgment, for constant value reinforcement, will that just end up creating an even larger, vastly more critical, and perhaps even more precarious layer of hidden human labor? Could we end up with a massive ghost workforce whose primary job is simply to constantly monitor, correct, and fine-tune the AGI, just to ensure it remains safe and aligned with constantly evolving human values? It's a strange thought, but maybe the ghost workforce doesn't disappear with AGI. Maybe it just becomes the final, most indispensable, and potentially most critically important layer of the AI safety mechanism itself, forever trapped at the very edge of technological capability, performing the ultimate last-mile task.